course. Well, we were in Abyei because there was a lot of suffering in Abyei. We were trying to help some of the orphans and people who'd suffered from the floods. And so we were helping to provide food and mosquito nets. But while we were there, one morning, 4 or 5 days ago, we woke up to the terrible news of a massacre at Cologne. And we went immediately with the governor to witness the suffering of the people. And we arrived very soon after the massacre had been carried out. The tukals were still burning. The burnt bodies were inside the huts. And there was already a grave with many of the bodies of the people who'd been killed, including a child. And it was a heartbreak scene. There were obviously the corpses, there were those who were grieving the wounded, and one of the most heartbreaking was the fact that many children were abducted between the age of 2 and 12. And I think that is a terrible thing, because if you lose someone, they're killed, that is terrible, terrible, terrible. But if your child is taken and you don't know what has happened and what is happening to them in abduction into slavery, then that is no closure. You just spent all the time worrying. And when I was up in Abyei, staying in the UN compound, I met a young man there, and he came to me and said, "Thank you so much. When I was a slave, I was taken as a little boy, age 5, but you rescued me." And he told us his story, how much he'd suffered. And so I think the abduction is a terrible part of the massacre, as well as the death and the injury and the bereavement.
And you now, as one of the international body humanitarian organization, so what you will tell the world about your visit to South Sudan?
Well, I think just to remain in Abyei for the moment, there is enormous need for help, and with the political status of Abyei, it's very hard for in fact they don't go, the big aid organizations, so there is a lot of need there, which needs a lot more help than they can get, because the big aid organizations will not go for political reasons. So I'd say one problem is to get enough humanitarian aid to the people, and that is food and medicine, but also education, the important things, healthcare. But the other thing was a very worrying thing which we were told when we were at Cologne, where the massacre was, that they said that the UN, UNISFA, the UN body responsible for protection of the people of Abyei, had been there the day before, and the people were worried because they'd seen many Arabs around, and they wanted to flee. But the UN security forces said, "No, don't go. We can't protect you if you run into the bush. Stay where you are." And then they left, and before any other people came to replace them, the massacre took place. So if they had run, as they felt they wanted to do, they would probably have been saved, most of them. But because they stayed, because they were told to stay, then they suffered so much. So that is a big question which needs, I think, serious investigation and a report as to why that was the UNISFA policy.